Hello, in this presentation we will compare QuickBooks Online versus QuickBooks Desktop. Hello, in this presentation we will enter a purchase order into QuickBooks Online. Here we are on the QuickBooks Online dashboard. We will be continuing with the Get Great Guitar problem. If you've been continuing along with us, that's great. If not, that's okay. We're going to be entering a purchase order at this time. Before we continue on entering the purchase order, we're going to check the settings to see that we have the tracking for customers within the purchase order. So we have the purchase order turned on, we have purchase orders enabled. We want to check that the tracking for customers so that we can enter customer fields as will become more apparent is enabled. In order to do that, we're going to go to this cog up top, select this cog up top, and we're going to go to the account settings. We want to see our account settings. Within the account settings, we're going to scroll down to the expense tab on the left hand side. Looking through those expense tabs, we want to pick this one here, the tracking expense items by customer. It's currently turned off. I'm going to turn this on, turn that item on. Then that'll allow us to click this item. So we'll click that item and then save this. And now that item is on. So we have the track expenses and items on. This will allow us to add a customer field as we enter data into our purchase order. So I'm going to close out of this and go back to the dashboard. So we'll close this, Xing out. There's a couple ways to get into the purchase order. Rather than going through the left-hand side item here, we're going to go to this little plus item up top. So we're going to select the plus item. This is going to give us most of the transactions we have in a drop-down type fashion. So we have customers, vendors, employees, and other. When we're talking about a purchase order, what we're doing is we're requesting the purchase of something from our vendors. And the purchase order is going to be a little bit different when we think about this series of transactions as opposed to if we were to purchase something, say, from like Amazon or something online. When we purchase something from Amazon or something online, we have to basically make the payment at the point of purchase, and then we receive the goods after payment has been made. However, if we're purchasing a lot of goods, a lot of times the purchaser has a bit more authority within the transaction, and therefore we might be able to request the inventory to be shipped, actually receive the inventory, count the inventory, see if it is in accordance with what we ordered it to be, and then record or make the payment. And that's what we're going to do here. In this case, what we're saying is we are going to be requesting inventory, not making a payment for that point in time at the point in time that we request it, and we won't be making a payment until after it's received. So this is really just a request. We're just saying, hey, we need this much inventory, ship it over to us, we'll check it out, we'll see if it's what we want, and then we'll make the payment for you. There's actually no transaction related to the purchase order, just going to be a request. So here it is down here. This is the purchase order. We'll select this item. Here is the purchase order. It looks like a bill, but it doesn't have any terms in it because we're not actually making a payment, of course. And we're going to just tab through this information and populate this as we go. I do recommend using the tab function and just tabbing through some forms as you get to complex forms. And that'll just basically let you at least see each input field within the form. First one is going to be to choose the vendor. Vendors are going to be who we buy from. We are requesting the purchase of inventory. We're going to buy guitars in this case. We buy guitars. So we're going to buy a guitar and we're going to choose the vendor, the person that we purchase from. We already have the vendor set up, so we're going to select the drop down and we're looking for Epiphone. So that's going to be Epiphone. Not totally sure it's spelled right, but we're going to say it's Epiphone. Then we're going to tab through this. And we're not going to have anything on the email. The mailing address has been populated with what we already have in the vendor field. Doesn't include an address. Probably we should put an address in there for the vendor, but this will be what we need in order to populate and record the data. We're not going to put a ship to here. The shipping address, this will be ours. It's populated automatically because we have that entered into the system, of course. And then we're going to have the purchase date. Now this is going to be the default date, but we're going to put in the date of 01/21/21. This is the year that we're going to be working in, 2021, starting in January. So January 12th is the date of this transaction. Nothing in the ship via, and we'll tab through, and then we've got the customer field. I'm going to tab through this as well, and we're scrolling down and we want to see the items down here. So these are going to be the inventory items. We've gone through in the past and input the inventory items. These are going to be guitars that we're purchasing for us because we're buying guitars and selling guitars. And so if you want to look into how to input those inventory items, you can take a look at that. If this was a new inventory item, we could enter it here. Because this is a recurrent inventory item, we're going to select the drop down and see if we can find this piece of inventory. So we'll select the drop down. We're looking for the ELP, so that's going to be the Epiphone Les Paul. So we'll select the ELP, Epiphone Les Paul, and it'll populate for us automatically. So then we already have this set up. So here's the description. We're going to buy one of them. The rate's going to be 400. The amount then will be 400. And then we have the customer field over here, and we could enter a customer. Now, before we do that, we do want to point out that the rate looks kind of like there's something happening in terms of a financial transaction. We see numbers, we see dollar signs down here. Now, this rate already is populated because we put it in there when we entered the data, and that means that it's going to be the rate of the guitar that we purchased, not the rate that we're going to sell the guitar for. We had to enter both of those in when we set up the inventory item. And the other thing to note is that although we're seeing the cost here, we're not actually recording it because one, we haven't received the guitar yet, and therefore we're not going to increase the inventory by the 400 until we do. And two, we're not actually making a payment with this purchase order. It's just a request to purchase the guitars at this price, and therefore we're not going to record any reduction in cash or any accounts payable showing that we owe this money. Nothing will be recorded in terms of financial transaction. That's really unusual with the purchase order. That's why I'm making kind of a big deal with it. Any other form we make, typically there'll be financial transactions, especially if we see numbers like this at the bottom of the form, such as an invoice or a bill or a sales receipt. Those are all going to have effects on the financial statements, on the balance sheet and the income statement. Okay, so now we're going to add the customer. Now, if you don't see the customer tab, you have to go through that process we did at the beginning of the video in order to make sure that customer tab is there. Customer tab, optional field, because it's not always going to be there. We don't always need it, meaning a lot of times we're just going to order a lot of guitars. We're going to have them in the store, and there's no particular customer that we ordered the guitar for. However, if in the case of guitars, we might have some custom guitars, or guitars could be expensive in some cases, and we may have a customer say, hey, I want this particular guitar. I want it in this fashion. I want this color on it or whatnot. And therefore, we would make the custom order for that person. We're going to say, hey, we're purchasing this guitar specifically for this particular customer. In doing so, we can then link that to the invoice that we'll later create when we actually deliver the guitar and expect payment on the guitar. So a customer field, optional field, can be useful for those custom type orders when we're ordering specifically for a customer. We're going to say that the customer is a new customer. If we select the drop down, we don't have this customer yet. It's going to be Eric Music, we're going to call it. So Eric Music is going to be our customer, and we're going to be able to add that just as we go. So we're going to say add that customer, select the add field. It's going to be a new customer, and we're just going to save that as is. And there we have it. If we tab through this, there we have it. So the customer is added. Here's our totals here. No effect on the financials. We're going to go ahead, save this item. So we're going to save this. And then we could print this information. So I'm going to go ahead and print this at this point. We're going to print it out. And this will be it. So if we scroll through this, there's our item. Now I'm going to download it in our printing. So I'm going to select the download. And there's our PDF file. I'm going to scroll down and see where we want to put this. I'm going to put it into this Excel docs here. And I'm going to change the name. So we'll make the name, we want to have it, let's just call it a purchase order. And we probably want the date. You might want to put the date up in the front, 01/12/21. That's what we'll put there. And you could format the date, depends how you want to order this thing. So think about how we want to order them. And we're going to say save that information. And there is our purchase order. Note if we wanted to email it, then we would of course need the email tab, and then we can go ahead and send that directly rather than saving it and then emailing it. Hello, in this presentation we're going to enter a purchase order and add a new inventory item at the same time into QuickBooks Online. We will be continuing with the Get Great Guitars problem. If you've been following along with us, that's great. If not, that's okay. We're going to be entering a new purchase order with an added inventory item that we will have to add as we go. We're going to go a little bit faster. We've seen the purchase order before with no new inventory item. So we'll go a bit faster. If you want more detail, take a look at that prior presentation. To enter the purchase order, we're going to go up top. We're going to select this item, this little plus item, and this is where most of our transactions will be located. So we have the customers, we have the vendors. We're going to be here under vendors because we're going to be purchasing from a vendor, vendor meaning who we purchase from. And we're going to scroll down and we want, of course, the purchase order. So we will select the purchase order. It's important to note what the purchase order is. We're not actually purchasing the inventory or paying for the inventory. There's no actual financial transaction going on here and it's different than if we were to purchase something from like Amazon, where we would make the payment and then receive the inventory or what we bought later in the mail. Here, we're not making a payment. We're going to make the payment when we receive the inventory. We're just requesting the inventory. No financial transaction really happening. Just going to be a paper request. So in order to do that, we're going to go through here. I do recommend tabbing through these fields as we go so that we touch on every field, and that'll just be good practice for going through any type of data input. So we're going to start up at the top. We're going to choose the vendor. This is going to be a new vendor. So when we select the drop down, it's going to be Gibson. We don't have a Gibson yet. So we're going to add the vendor. I'm going to do that by first just typing in Gibson. And I'm going to select tab, or if we can just select the plus here, select plus. And it's going to guess that we want to add Gibson as a vendor, and that is of course correct. So we're going to say add and save. Then we'll go ahead and tab through. There's no email, Gibson. We're not going to put a mailing address yet, so we're just going to keep the name, although we might want a mail address. Ship to, we're going to keep that the same. Date, we're going to change the date to, it will be as, we're going to say 01/12/21, January 12th, 2021. Note, this is going to give us the current date, but we want to be working on the future in our problem here, so we will change the date. 01/12/21, January 12th, 2021. We'll keep tabbing through here. So we've got the product or the service item as the next item we're going to have. These are going to be inventory items. And what we're going to do is request these inventory items. They've already been input into the item list for the most part. However, we're now going to be entering an item that has not been input into our item list, and we'll be inputting it or creating it as we create the purchase order. To do that, we'll select the product or service. And once again, if we select the drop down, these are all the guitars that we've purchased before, and we have a purchase order or item set up for them. This one we're going to say it's abbreviated as a GSB, so we're going to call it a GSB, not included yet, and therefore we will add it. So I'm going to add this information. It's going to be an inventory type item, so we're going to say it's going to be inventory, meaning it's going to have both a sales price and a cost. It's not a service item that we will be inputting. We're going to keep the short name here. We could put the full name, and it's going to be actually the Gibson SG will be the full name. I'm going to keep the GSB here because that's going to go under the product item. We're going to scroll down. I'm going to tab through these items, category, no category, initial quantity. We don't have any because we're just purchasing it. As of date, report point. We're going to keep scrolling down. I'm tabbing through these items. Inventory asset account, it's going to be an inventory asset account, so that's because we're purchasing inventory, so that's correct. Sales description, this is where I'm going to put the full name, and that is going to be a Gibson SG. So we're going to have the Gibson SG there, and then we're going to have the sales price. This is what we're going to sell it for, not what we're going to put here in the purchase order. The sales price, not the purchase price. That's going to be 777.40 cents. The income account, now it might default to something other than, it might say sales of product. We're going to just call it sales. That's going to be our sales of product. So I'm going to select the sales account, then tab through this, and then the description, once again, Gibson SG, and that's the purchasing information. And then finally the cost, this is what we're going to buy it for. This is what's actually going to go on this form, and that's going to be the $598. That's what we're going to be purchasing for, and that will go to the cost of goods sold, meaning when we sell it, we're going to credit or increase the sales amount of, and that's our revenue or income account, by the $777.40. Then we're going to increase the cost of goods sold, which is an expense, of the $598. The difference between these two, of course, being the profit when we sell this particular Gibson SG guitar. So we're going to save and close that. Actually, these are required fields up here, so I'm going to put initial quantity on hand 0 as of date. It's going to be the beginning of this year, 01/01/21, and then we're going to say save and close. And then we populate this item. So here's our new item. It's a GSB Gibson SG. We're going to get one of those, and the rate's going to be $598. That's of course the purchase price, not the sales price that we had included. Sales price will be included when we make the related invoice to this sale. And we're going to again add a customer here. Now, once again, this isn't going to be something we're going to use all the time for every purchase order. We might just be buying this guitar to have in the shop to sell to whoever wants to purchase it. But in this case, we're going to add the purchase order saying that we're purchasing it for a particular customer who came in and said, I want this particular guitar. Could you buy it? Want this color or these dimensions for it? And then we're going to buy it. And then we'll be able to link this purchase order to a particular customer, that customer being Music Stuff Store. So we're going to call it Music Stuff Store, add the customer, and so that's going to be our customer there. So here is our information. We're going to save this note, however, that although we have information down here, this is really unusual for forms in that we don't have an actual financial transaction. No financial statement account, no balance sheet account, no income statement account being affected by this $598. Just a request that will then help us to prepare this information. When we receive the inventory, we can then match out what we got and see if it matches what we have here, and then use this information to help populate and record that inventory as well as the next invoice or sales receipt once we sell this or finish the sale to our client customer, in this case Music Store Stuff. So we're going to go ahead and print this information. If we had the email address up top, we could email this, save an email directly from here. We are going to print it as a PDF file so we can email it there and or send it out. So we'll go ahead and print this, and I am going to then download this information. And it's going to the place I want it to go to, so I'm just going to keep it there. And we're going to put the date. It's going to be 01/21. And note, I already have one there, so I probably should put something else. Music Stuff Store. And that's the PO. Okay, and we'll save that. And there is our purchase order. Hello, in this presentation we will discuss how to create a purchase order within QuickBooks Pro 2018, as well as why to create a purchase order, when to create a purchase order, and what the purchase order will do within the software of QuickBooks Pro 2018. If you've been following along with us in this process, we will be continuing with the Get Great Guitars problem. If you have not and just want to know what to do in order to create a purchase order, what a purchase order is and how it works within the QuickBooks program, that is fine too. If you have access to the backup file as of this point in the program, then you could restore that backup file in order to be exactly where we are at this point in time. In order to do so, we're going to go to the File tab and restore or open or restore company. We would be looking to restore the company, and that way we can be at the same point at the same time if you have access to those backup files as we go. We are entering data here, so as we enter data, when we get to the end of this data that we have entered, we are in hopes of being all in the same spot. And if we're not, we want to see the differences that we are at, and also just basically be able to start at the next point and not let the past errors mess us up in order to learn the new concepts. So we're going to discuss the purchase order here. Now within the purchase order, if you're in the Home tab, as we are here, if you're not in the Home tab, we would go to Company and the Home tab. Note that you would also want the Open Windows open by going to View, Open Windows, and that'll give us the open windows that we are currently using, this one being the Home tab only. And the purchase order is going to have to do typically with purchasing inventory. Therefore, it's going to be up in the top of the Home tab located in the Vendors section. The Vendors section of the Home tab will look a lot more simplistic if we are in a type of business that's a service-oriented business. So if you're looking at the Home tab and you're saying, hey, all I have are basically bills and then pay bills, that's because most likely we are set up as a service business. And if you go to a prior presentation, you can see how to set up the company as a merchandiser, in which case you would be typically purchasing and selling inventory. If that is the case, then QuickBooks gives you a few more options within the Home tab. One of those options being the purchase order. Now, when we have the purchase order, so we know the process of the concept of purchasing inventory, it would seem straightforward, but it's a little bit different than we might think from our normal individual purchases. For example, if we were to purchase something from, say, Amazon, and we bought something, a widget or something from Amazon, then typically we pay for it either with cash or credit card or some type of deposit, and then we get the merchandise after the payment has been made. When we buy in bulk, though, it's often the case that we have more control over the purchasing items if we purchase a lot then. We would like to have the purchase order then, receive the inventory before we record it and before we enter the bill even or make a payment. That's what's going to happen in this case. We're going to have a purchase order. The purchase order is not a payment method. It really is not even any financial transaction. It's going to be something that's going to give us information within the system. One of the few, if only, icons on this page where we're going to enter something in where it will not be reflected on the financial statements directly, there being no financial transaction. Meaning, what are we going to do? We're going to request from the vendor, in our case, the guitar vendor, Epiphone, I believe, is who we're going to be purchasing from. And we're going to request a certain amount of guitars. That's all we're doing. We're requesting. We're not paying for them yet. And once we receive them, then over here, receive the inventory, typically with a bill, then we're going to record the fact that they have been received. That's when we're going to put the inventory on the books. So note that that's a little bit reversed. That's a little bit unusual for most people to comprehend, considering the fact that as we purchase things as individuals, we typically pay before we get the stuff. In this case, we're going to ask for the stuff, get the stuff before we even enter the bill, and then of course we will pay the bill in the normal process after that point. So how are we going to enter this data? What we're going to do here is we have a purchase order that we want to do because we need more guitars for our Get Great Guitars store. We're going to be purchasing from Epiphone, and we're going to be purchasing guitars here. We will then click on the purchase order within the home page. Within the purchase order, we will open up the purchase order window. We're going to type in the vendor who we would like to make the purchase from. Remember that we're not actually making the purchase at this point. We're just making the purchase order. And so there's no actual transaction. If we type in the name, it'll show the name within the drop-down. I'm going to select tab then. I'm going to select the shipping terms. I'm going to actually skip this at this point. We're going to go to the template. We're going to keep the same default template. And we can get into the styles of the templates a bit later in terms of the purchase orders as well as in terms of the invoices. There's a lot of things you can do within the templates, but I'm getting down to just kind of the functionality now. What happens when we have a purchase order? What happens when we have an invoice? So we're going to have the date is going to be 1 day up, and remember that we are working in 2021, so note it just kind of remembered the last date we were working with. That's one of the options we had. Very useful when working a problem such as this. Then I'm going to say tab. Now I'm going to start again with the first purchase order, not 1 but 1001, and then we're going to continue on from that point forward. The Epiphone, we may want to have the address and whatnot. If we have that in file, that would be great. If not, we'll not put it in there for the example here. Then we're going to have to find the item. Now remember, where are these items? They were input when we made our lists of inventory items. So if you go to list and you go to item list, we then have the items here in our open windows. We see the item list is where we are at right now. This list then includes inventory items. So these are going to be our inventory items. So before we make the purchase, assuming that we have done business before and we've purchased these guitars before, we already know then the item number, the short number for these items, and the item name, as well as the price. This will also give us the quantity that we have on hand at this point in time. So we already have this information. We're going to request and we're going to list the name, the reference number, and the cost on our purchase order. We will then toggle back to the purchase order in the open item list over here. Remember, if you don't have that open item list open, go to View, Open Items, and we're going to open that up, and here we are. So we're going to include, this is going to be, I'm just going to type in the ELP. This is going to be the item number, and that will then generate the description here, and that's going to be an Epiphone Les Paul. We're going to get one of those items. Now, an optional screen within the purchase order is going to be having a customer. You don't have to have a customer within here. It may be that we are purchasing this just to have in the store and then to sell at any given point in time within the store. However, it could often be that if we have something like guitars, something large, that we may be saying, hey, customer, what would you like? Here's what we have in terms of an Epiphone. Would you like something different? And they might want to customize it a bit, have a different color or something like that. And therefore, we would be ordering specifically for a particular customer. And if that's the case, we'll put the customer here. And in this case, that's going to be Eric Music. Good name. All right, so we're going to have that there. Now, we don't have this individual or this store in the system yet. So when we select Tab, it's going to say, do you want to set this up? And we're going to say yes, and I'm going to say a quick setup. Now, if this was a customer, a repeat customer, we may want to do the more intensive setup and make sure that we have all the customer information. But for purposes of this, we're going to keep the quick setup in order just to link this purchase order to the later invoice that we will then have. So then there we have that. Note we have the summary balance on the right hand side. If you do not want to see this or you want more of the screen, you can collapse that and then uncollapse that like so. So once again, note what's going to happen when we record this then is, one, there's going to be no financial transaction, meaning when we go to the financial statements, nothing's going to happen. However, there will be data that will be input. We would print this out. We would send it to Epiphone, who would then send us a guitar. And when we then invoice the client or the customer for the guitar, then it would generate, it's going to link it to this automatically. It's going to say, hey, you know what? You made a purchase order for this. And do you want to then use that to link to it and pull that information, linking the purchase order to the invoice? And of course, we're going to say, yes, we would like to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and say save and close. We'll go save and close. And I'm going to go to the Home tab. So we'll go to the Home tab here. And note we made a purchase order. And what's going to happen later, again, is we're going to receive the purchase order. And then that's when we're going to record the bill that's going to be arriving along with the guitar. And then once we receive the guitar and enter the bill, then we're going to have an invoice to the customer. So we're going to invoice the customer, and as we invoice the customer and name that customer, it will then tell us, do you want to link it to that particular guitar that we named within the purchase order. And of course, we will want to do it at that point in time, tying them together. Note again that this purchase order is very unusual. The purchase order does not create or cause a financial transaction, meaning it's not going to affect the reports, our main financial statements. So to take a look at that, let's open the main two financial statements, those being the balance sheet and the income statement, by going to reports up top, scrolling down to company and financial. I'm going to start with the balance sheet. We'll keep that open, and that's going to be as of 12/31/21. That's the year that we happen to be working in here within this problem. Also going to open the profit and loss, our other primary report, that being reports, company and financial, profit and loss. Date range there is going to be 01/01/21 to 12/31/21. And there we have the date range there. no activity here, obviously on the profit and loss within our relevant range. We haven't entered any data that is either revenue or expense. And on the balance sheet, note that none of this is either asset, liability, or equity, meaning although we ordered a guitar, it's not in the inventory yet. We haven't received it, and therefore shouldn't be increasing our inventory. We don't have claim to it yet, and we have not yet paid for it. And therefore, there's going to be no accounts payable yet because we haven't even entered the bill yet. We haven't even got the bill. It's just a purchase order. So no activity, nothing happening here in terms of the financial statement for the purchase order. Next, we're going to make one more of these. So we're going to go back to the Home tab, and we're going to make another purchase order. Therefore, we're going to go to the Purchase Order tab, once again, Purchase Order icon. And we're going to have now from Gibson Guitar. This is going to be a new item. We do not yet have Gibson. We've never purchased from Gibson before, and therefore we're going to have to set this up as we go. So we're going to say tab, and it's going to say, do you want to set this up? Again, we would probably want to set up the full setup here, entering any contact information, phone, and address and everything. However, in order to link out this information, we're just going to do the quick add right now so we can see what will happen here in terms of concept. So we're going to say quick add. We're not going to do the drop ship to. We're going to keep the same template. The date that we are going to be using is 01/12/21. We now have the number that is generating automatically. We have the vendor. We have our information. We're then going to put the item. Once again, we've never purchased from Gibson, so if we were to take a look at our item list in the open windows over here and look for something that would be the Gibson related, we should not have one yet because we've never done business with Gibson, and therefore we're going to have to set up a new item. We could do that here within the item list by going to items and new, but we can also do it within this process while we set up the purchase order, which is nice and convenient. That then what we will do at this time. Back to the purchase order, we're going to say that we're going to get a GSB. That's going to be the item name, the short name, and we're going to say, it's going to say we don't have this. Basically it's saying, would you like to set it up, this item, this inventory item, this new thing you're trying to purchase from this new vendor? We're going to say yes, we would like to do that. And it's going to guess that we want an inventory part. That is true. Inventory part meaning it is a physical thing, not a service. And therefore we'll have both a cost of goods sold side and a sales side to the transaction, to the data that will be needed when we make the purchase order and later when we use this as the component to make the invoice. So I'm just going to tab through this. I'm not going to have a part number. The description, we're going to call it a Gibson SG. Same description over here. The cost then, how much it's going to cost to us, is going to be the $598 that we'll have. The cost account being cost of goods sold, that the expense account that we will use when we write down the expense, when we write the invoice, when we sell the guitar. Then we're going to have the sales side of it, and we're going to say that's of course going to be more, and we're going to take 777.4, 777 and 40 cents. We will have tax, that referring to sales tax. Now I'm going to go back over here. We had a vendor, and that's going to be Gibson. It's going to be our preferred vendor. We're always going to buy from for this particular item. And then we have the income account, and that's going to be merchandise inventory, merchandise sales. And that could vary. We could customize that, but if you just chose an inventory account within the QuickBooks setup, then QuickBooks would then set up the sales of merchandise as just merchandise inventory. If you sell multiple things and want to break that sales account in to a different name or multiple sales account, we could call it guitar sales or something like that. That could be done. This is kind of the generic name for any inventory sold. So we're going to say OK, and we have that information. And how many of these are we going to get? So we're just going to say 1, and we're going to have 589. Do we want a customer? Not required, but we are going to say that we have a customer looking for this particular guitar, and we're going to buy it specifically for them. and we're going to call it Music Stuff Store. Very nice name. Music Stuff Store, and there we have that. Now we don't have this customer yet. This is who we are eventually going to sell to. We're purchasing from Gibson for this customer, Music Stuff Store, and so we're going to say set up. Again, we would probably want a setup to have all the data, but in order to not go on forever here, we're going to just have the quick setup in order to get this going. And there we have that new account set up. And we're going to say save and close. Once again, no transaction happening here. Nothing happened to our merchandise. We didn't get more merchandise yet. Notice we have this inventory item here, but nothing there yet until we receive the inventory along with the bill. Going to scroll back to the home tab. That's what we have so far. Remember, next time or shortly, we will be receiving a bill and the phone, or the Epiphone, and the Gibson, the two guitars, the inventory that we just bought. And we will likely be making an invoice that is related to the customers that ordered those, or were the reasons that we ordered those two guitars.